Good morning, good morning. For a few of you, it may be a bit early, but at 2 a.m., I think it was, last night, it became daylight savings here in Australia. One of the few places in the world that still use daylight savings, I'm not sure. Anyway, guess today's Karu, say hello.
Hello.
And talking about ridiculous double standards today, I initially thought talking about ultimatums as well, but that's slightly different. A double standard could be an ultimatum, basically blackmailing you into something, but I think focusing on the very particular nature of a double standard and how it's expressed or used to manipulate people. And there obviously are reasonable double standards. Everyone, I think, automatically reacts to it as in it's always unfair, and it mostly is, but that nuance is important, and it can be used to manipulate people. What are your thoughts on a reasonable and unreasonable double standard, Karu?
I don't know. I need an example because for me, every double standard is unreasonable. What would be a reasonable one?
Um, you're taller, and a chick asks you to get something off the top shelf, and some guys will say, "Well, get it for yourself. Get it yourself." Or you're
But
stronger, or even if she could go outside and I don't know, take the bins out or clean up or do something, you prefer her to stay inside, and she does as well. And it looks like a double standard, but they could be preferences or mutually agreed on um, things. So that kind of thing. They're just ones off the top of my head. But so you think
well,
that every double standard is unfair?
I see a standard as a rule because that to me that's what standards are. They're ways to comport yourself or ways in which you operate something. And if you have different ways of operation for two different people, that's what I see as a double standard. So I think that in those situations they are definitely unfair to one party or the other. A lot of the times, things that people see as double standards really aren't double standards. Uh, take for example somebody not liking speeches, and they're at a wedding, and the mother-in-law insists to have a speech because her first son is married or whatever else. It doesn't matter how much you don't like speeches. It may be a quote unquote standard for the one of the married parties to not like that thing, but you kind of need to shut up and let the mother-in-law do her thing because it's respectable and so on and so forth. Like it's not a hard and fast rule that you need to put into place. But if it's only people above 6 feet can go on this ride, and then you let somebody that's 4 foot go on the ride, then I see it as a double standard.
Mm. Lat QCD 92 said something I think that's pretty reasonable and I would agree with. He said, let me see if I can. No, my chat isn't popped up. There it is. He said, plenty of reasonable double standards, so long as each person gets a mutually beneficial trade off. And I'd agree with that. This is the thing, things like that, there are traditions, right? All of this points back to something we've discussed for a while. It's if you talk with the person about your own personal standards and ethics during the first few dates, the person understands your values and your standards, right? And so then later, if you get to know this person's character and where they slot in, that you can clearly and more clearly over time gauge the standards by which this person operates, that's what ethics are. The practical standards by which someone operates, the rules by which they adhere that you can count on them by. Like this person will generally almost always, I can guarantee, react in this way, or think about this situation where I have to do this or not do this in this way, and I'm good with that. If you get to know the person well enough, then those unfair double standards I don't think will come about later. But there are traditions, there are expectations, but if you never voice them, you'll never know them. And I think people who don't communicate run into that a lot. Whereas the particular standards that both of you agree upon, it really doesn't need to adhere to anyone else's standards, right? But I think that an important thing is if you really talk about your standards and your values, then you're not going to run into this, oh my God, I can't believe she thought this or she reacted this way. I never thought she would do this. But I think if you talk and communicate and you get a really well-rounded, logical, realistic view of the person, I don't think it'll intrude as much. But I guess we're talking about the generic unfair double standards that we see in social media, or you meet someone and as you're getting to know them, they punch you in the face with a double standard that's ridiculous to you. Have you actually ever come across any ridiculous double standards in your private life, Karu?
Not particularly, and maybe if I did, I just didn't care about them. I either found solutions to them, or I just never really noticed them. Nothing that really stood out, which is why for me it's a pretty it's a pretty weird topic, because if you view standard as quality, it's hard to use the name double standard, because standards will be different from person to person. Just think about cleaning a room. Like, your standard of a room being clean is completely different from mine. You may want everything in there to be squeaky clean, sparkly, and everything else. And for me, if there's a bit of dirt in the corner, I don't really care. It's good enough. Which is why I think it's a I wouldn't say complicated topic, but it's a complex topic depending on the people that are negotiating. Because every little aspect of your life, you're going to be at peace or not so much at peace with it, depending on the quality that you expect from something.
I think double standards have been highly politicized. And as you mentioned at the start, that they are just standards, whether they're personal or more moral and social. Like, everyone agrees that these standards are fair and correct, like politeness and all that sort of stuff, how you treat strangers. There's certain standards that are reasonable. And yeah, I think it's been politicized, whereas I think if it's well-meaning and the person, like for instance here, Leslie, she, thank you for the super chat, by the way, Leslie. If anyone wants to ask me a question, super chat me and I'll see it. Or alternatively, add 3 yellow emojis before your question or comment to me if you're here live, and I should be able to see it. Something like this. Just an example of asking me a question with 3 circles or 3 smiley faces, and I should be able to see it. But Leslie says, men in the grocery store will ask me for advice in buying tampons for their wives. Totally reasonable. Yes, there's an example. And again, I think politically why I mention that is that in this kind of political climate of everyone wanting everything to be equal, and if one person has an exceptional viewpoint that's right, and it's not necessarily right on another side, people do their best to make it equal, even though there's no reason why it should be. Like this. Why should a man be knowledgeable in tampons? Why, even advice, like we all have different interests. Men and women generally learn skills differently just by the way they're brought up and their friend groups, but just innately their interests that sort of diverge. You will have different standards given the interests that diverge between guys and girls and where you've been brought up and things like that. I think everyone's just ready to be triggered if everyone isn't a mirror of you, you're ready to put up the guard and get the sword out and fight them politically. Whereas I think if you're being reasonable and you're not meaning to, the intent isn't to be, provocative and to debate and to provoke and cause an argument, then I think it's a lot of most double standards are unreasonable, but I'd say there's a fair few that are reasonable if you're level headed. And if you're reasonable double standards will present themselves more clearly, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Well, a lot of the times I get the impression that double standards are seen by the people that are outside of the interaction. Take the classic example of the skinny guy and the overweight girl, and the opposite, where it's if it's an overweight girl with a fit guy, it's like, oh, you go girl, you do your thing. But if it's a overweight gentleman with a very attractive female, oh, he's a pig, he has money, he has whatever. Now, I think that a lot of the time the interpretation of that double standards comes from the outside, and it comes from observers. It never comes from within the couple itself. And ultimately, the people that are important are the ones that are engaging within the interaction there. It's not the outside world or the looks that come from outside that make any sense to me when it comes to judging these types of things. I mean, another example of a double standard is parents leaving their 16-year-old boy out for how long he wants, but then telling their 16-year-old daughter that she needs to be in the house by 10 p.m. For me, that would be a reasonable double standard. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, but they're practical considerations as well. I think I think the unreasonable double standard. Well, by the way, one or two people have said that I'm coming in low. Um, do I need to increase my volume? Perhaps I'll try and increase it by a little bit. That should be a bit better. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anyway, yeah, things like looking out for someone, where, yeah, like looking out for a child, they're naive or they don't have your experience or worldview, whereas someone in your position or your experience is aware of potential dangers, and you're trying to keep them safe, reasonably so. You're not telling them what to do because you want to dominate them, but you are in a protective, caring way trying to um, give them a standard that may seem unfair, but it does apply to them for their well-being. But again, that's that gray area, the nuance of being able to reasonably understand a double standard that's meant to be practically safe for you or something like that.
Yeah, but that's the issue, isn't it? Because somebody can view it as a double standard, but if you know the person, you know that the risks are different. Like, yeah, you're taking the example of the son and the daughter. Well, the risks for the daughter are completely different than the risks that a son has. A son can get pregnant. And
Yep.
if you don't want your daughter to have an abortion and whatever else, and you're going to keep the kid and so on and so forth, there are completely different risks involved. You don't know you as a parent know which one of the two is more mature. You know what friend group the kid has and so on and so forth. There are so many layers beyond the superficial. Well, they're both 16 and they should both do whatever they want. Like, even if you have two sons, you're going to have parents treat them differently, even if they're the same age, based on how they act, what their friend group is, and so on and so forth. Yeah, you can easily look at it and say, oh, double standards. Well, why is one son allowed to go out and then stay out for longer while the other one isn't? Well, because one's a drug addict and the other one is going out to play World of Warcraft with his friends. Like, there's a very big difference between the two.
Yeah. Like, it's reasonably assessing the situation, and given a person's character or their gender or whatever it might be, you're not worried about them, or you're more worried about them. If it comes from a place of concern, and the double standard is actually meant to look out for them or offer them constructive advice, rather than being the opposite, being demeaning, or like a lot of the online comments, like, I can do this but you can't, for no reason at all. It's got nothing to do with the differences between the sexes. Socially protecting other people, like you said, from, you would protect your daughter more from staying up late and or dressing a certain way. You would say, don't dress that way, whereas you wouldn't care how your son dressed. So there's a lot of things that are practically based in double standards. But I think someone who's either very political or very young and naive, and just basically very unreasonable or naive, won't see those things, and they'll want to do what they want to do because they want to do them. My take is you try your best, but at some point you stop fighting and you let them know. I mean, maybe it's, some people think I'm very cold this way, but I really don't see why. I kind of objectively see why, given everyone's telling me the same story about, say, parents have an addicted son to some substance, whether it's alcohol or, pills or whatever it might be. And over and over again, the son just keeps ruining his life and their lives while he's living with them, steals from them, like, and they just, oh, we love him because he's our son. You love him because he's our son. Mine's like, I don't care. Like, I will help anyone from, I'll try and save anyone from drowning until they start pulling me under intentionally, and not care. If they don't meet me part way, 20%, then I don't care, drown. I don't know why. Yeah, I do know why, because it's biological, it's their son. But they give everything while the son cares absolutely nothing for them, or the daughter cares absolutely nothing. And my take is, if there is double standards involved, you'll say, look, I'm trying to, protect you from this. And if they're petulant and saying, well, why can't I? It's not fair. It's patriarchal. It's whatever. It's like, okay, fine. I'm letting you know. But later on, if you come and say, why, like, I've said this in my private life. I've said this with even my missus now. I've said that if I'm trying to protect you from something, I say, don't go out here in this environment with your friends. And if she were to be kind of obstreperous and sort of pushing back on me and rude and saying, like, don't tell me what to do, I can do it, I don't need your permission, I'll be like, fine. But I don't want to call at 3 a.m. saying, oh, can you pick me up? Something happened. If I'm actually giving you a double standard or protecting you in a well-meaning way for something that's going to happen, and it does happen, I will not want to protect you from it, because you wanted to do whatever you wanted without considering me. And then again, at the end of the day, the person's responsible for their own lives. Especially if you're an adult, if you're trying to sort of protect them with the double standard, that seems like a double standard, and they can't reasonably understand where it's coming from, and it appears like a double standard, but really this standard is different for person A as compared to person B, because of who person A is and how person A will be affected being put in that environment compared to person B.
Yeah, for me, it's hard to find double standards because I probably interpret a lot of things differently. I've been reading examples of quote unquote double standards before the stream, and a lot of them to me just don't seem like double standards. A good example was, for example, when you have a politician that conscripts men to go to war, but he makes an exception for his own sons. That's what I see as a proper double standard. Like a lot of the other things that people complain about, like, oh, well, you know what, an assertive woman is seen as bossy, and for men it's a leadership trait. No, I view them both as assholes. Like, yeah, for me, it's the same thing. I don't necessarily see that as a double standard. Or there was another one where fathers get praised for cooking dinner while mothers are expected to cook dinner. Like that's just really weird to me, because it's like, well, what's the father doing? What's the mother doing? Is the father at work for 8 to 12 hours a day? Well, if he's at work for 8 to 12 hours a day and the mother's staying at home all the time, yeah, he should be praised for making dinner because he just came home from work and now he's cooking dinner. The mother's at home all the time. Like, why shouldn't he be praised? Like, he's doing extra fucking work.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot of nuance that goes into a lot of these things, unless it's a very clear example of a double standard, like with the example of conscription, where it's obvious that there's a problem with it. Like, even things like different days off for different religions, like, even that I don't see as a double standard. I mean, if you're in a country that's majority Christian and they don't want to give any other religious sect benefits, like, I don't care. Like, move. They're the majority. If they don't want to give you 3 days off, it's no sweat off of my back. It's your choice to live there.
It's the standard of the country. It doesn't align with your standards. You move. It's the same with a partner in a similar parallel context. That's the standards in that world. If you don't like it, you can't change it, especially if the person's stubbornly that way and knows who they are. Find someone else. If you can't talk and be on the same page with your standards, or if you can't live in the country that aligns with your standards and values, you move, or you're going to have a really hard time, and all you're going to do is complain.
Yeah, exactly. I think that double standards really need to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. And if they truly are double standards, then they either need to be nipped in the bud or somebody needs to be kicked to the curb.
Well, a popular one in the last few years is the double standard of pay, the pay gap, right? And that's basically being rewarded, what is it? Being rewarded with sort of money. Why aren't I equally rewarded with the same standard of money as the guys in this field? But again, that's a rational, like, the result appears like a double standard, but it's practically based. So, you know, just because you're a female sports star and you're a male sports star, which one do people naturally want to watch and pay for and spend their time in that generates money and revenue to be able to pay that area? You can complain that, well, they're both soccer players, but the point is one may as well, one's closer to watching a high school team play soccer, and the other one is the best soccer players on the entire planet, the elite of the elite. So the double standards is really kind of, people want the benefits of being able to have the freedom or the rewards of doing something, but you can't, and it's kind of an unfair double standard on the surface, but it's actually, what's the word, kind of practically based in the real world. You can't get those results. They don't work for you.
No, but they're comparing apples to oranges, because they're not. They're taking the idea of footballer and then applying it universally across the field. But all guys are stronger and faster than the female athletes. So you're comparing apples to oranges. They move faster, they think faster, they have better reflexes, they generate more income. You're essentially comparing two different things at the baseline. Oh, if you're comparing both teams that were equal from the same country, and then one of them was allowed to play and the other one wasn't, just based on the fact that somebody didn't like them or some stupid rule, then that is a double standard. But when it comes to pay and you're comparing men and women, well, they don't make the same amount of money. The game isn't as engaging. It doesn't have the same amount of eyes on the game. Like, it obviously you're going to get paid less. I don't expect to be paid as much as another person is doing the same job that I am in the US. Like, he lives in a different economic environment. It has nothing to do with double standards. He can have the same amount of clients that I do. He can do the same amount of work that I do. And he's probably going to get paid 10 or 20 times more than the amount of revenue that I'm getting each month. And I have no issue with that. Like, that's just how life is.
Do you think there's also like a large degree of when you act on a standard, then people don't necessarily like the results in the real world? So you can theorize, and they do in universities and social sciences, and say this isn't fair. Why can't both sides do act and get the same results? It's like in theory it would be nice, but applied to the real world, it just doesn't happen, and that's the friction.
Yeah, well, a lot of things don't map onto map onto real life. I mean, look at all the ideologies don't work that don't work, but people still cling on to them as though they're ever going to happen. Uh, I don't know. Pick your poison. Communism, the men walking away from women, the manosphere, whatever else under the sun. And using the example from before, I mean, it's not like sports teams are being paid uh, directly proportionally with their penis size. Because then it would be a double standard. Like you don't have one, so you're not getting paid. No,
Mm.
you're getting paid, and you're getting paid in relation to how much money you're generating. Like those aren't double standards. It's just the line of work you went into, and just
Mm.
because women's sports aren't as washed as men's sports, there's nothing that you can do about it. Maybe do better. Maybe play topless or something.
Yeah, I think that with when it comes to the kind of the difference between the men and women thing, I think it's a big disconnect because between the practical aspect of the world. Men have a very innate sense of touching grass and applying something to the world and generating results that make it real or get the rewards of money. Whereas innately women are just kind of they show up and they get rewards or money's thrown at them or they get praise just for being there. They don't actually have to do much. Whereas guys have a sense of doing something to get something back. And I think that's a lot of the friction between the genders there, because they just see, well, I'm a manager and he's a manager and he earns more, therefore unfair, and how can I want to earn the same, if not more than him, or at least the same. But when you look
Yeah,
at, go
yeah, but
ahead.
are you a manager in the same position? Because
Well,
you
say
you
you
can
are.
be a manager and you can have 40 different branches that you're managing, and you can be a manager and have two branches that you're managing.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, but say across the board, and I've touched on this in a recent video a while ago, where you they look at the resume, say between a man and the woman, and they've got exactly the same position. Ostensibly, they've had the same year's experience, but the woman has 3 kids, and therefore logically you assume she's taken time off for those kids, so she's actually
Mm-hmm.
had less
Mm-hmm.
years experience than the man. But that's that political nature of like, I should be paid the same because we've got the same position. No, let's look at the actual amount of experience. Let's look at how much you work,
Yep.
how, like, when you go to bed, how much you generated for the company. Do you have an X factor, even if you work less than the other person, that you still generate more creative output, that you're more suited to a certain field? It's not just so it's a combination of how hard you work, how competitive and driven, but also how innately skilled or a quality you have in that thing. So there's a lot of factors revolving around, but people like to simplify it to like real 5-year-old politics. Like, there's person A and person B. If they're not equal, why not? And we need to make them equal. And we need to pull down the person with more. Well, maybe the person with more actually earned it. Maybe it was being born into a certain neighborhood or a family, but it's not their fault. Why are you going to punish them for being born somewhere where you weren't? To me, that just sounds like sour grapes. But if they are actually taking something from you, that's one, criminal. But two, then you've got a case. But most of the time, they don't have a case. They just see a disparity, inequality, and say, well, it needs to be equal, and we don't care why it's unequal. Therefore, it's unfair.
Well, I'll give you an example from the workforce, because I have a lot of clients, and at least for a lot of the dental practices that I have, they need a lot of assistance, and to become a doctor, you need to spend a bit of time as as an assistant. And over here, a lot of the times what happens, you would have these young girls that finish school and they go to one of these businesses, they get hired as an assistant. Immediately they take sick leave. And then sometimes it's genuine, sometimes it's not. I've had cases where it turns out that the woman or whatever had some really nasty diseases. So they take sick leave for as much as they're allowed, sometimes 4 or 5 months. After that, they get pregnant, and you can't fire them when they're sick or when they're pregnant, and they take a year or two off. And during that entire time, you gain experience. It counts as time as you being hired. When you go to the next workplace and you wanna fill up an assistant slot, or you want to apply for becoming a doctor and starting your own business, they don't ask you if you actually worked for those 3 or 4 years that you had under your belt. They just look at your contract and said, oh, well, your contract worked for 4 years, so that means that you've worked for 4 years. Well, if you had 2 kids during those 4 years and you took sick leave, that's already almost 3 years out of the 4 that you didn't work. But you have the experience. And then the question becomes, well, you want to hire a woman or you want to hire a man? Which one's less risky out of the two?
Well, that's an example in a if I was a manager, but you'd probably be sort of sacked for it. I would say a reasonable double standard for me would be to ask, I mean, both of them, but more likely the woman, have you taken time off for maternity leave? Because that's, to me, very practical, because then I want to have a clear sense of your years of experience in this company, even if you've done great work, because if it's between you and someone else and you're a woman and he's a man, it just happens to be that way. And I can't decide between the two, but I find out you've actually had less experience. Like you said, I mentioned this before. I used to temp in the design field, and for a couple of years, I would say almost exclusively, I would temp for women taking time off for maternity leave. It just happened to be that way. It almost always, like a lot of the time, at least half of the time, I was temping for women taking maternity leave. And it was like for a year here, and then I'd go to another contract, and sometimes it'd be for 1 or 2 years. So here you get paid for 1 year maternity leave as though you were at work, and then you can take another year off without pay, but you still keep your job. So a woman who's says in a resume, I've had 7 years experience as a designer, but she's had 3 kids. She's only actually had 1 year. She's had 1 year experience as a designer, but she puts on her resume, I've had 7. But if a guy says, I've had 7 years experience, he's had 7 years experience. He might have taken a few months off, but that's like a holiday. So it's very, so the double standard of being able to ask, I think, to be practical, double standards reveal themselves to be fair or unfair. But I think people want to make it political because they want everyone to be equal to favor the broads out there.
Well, yeah, and if you look at what happens to all of these girls that try to pull these shenanigans, that they get fired 1 or 2 weeks after the interview. Like they always get fired. It's just
sometimes you can't tell until the probation period's ended. Similarly, a lot of guys who get locked into a relationship after the probation period. So a lot of them, and look, to be fair, also guys, they'll play the game, put on the smile, hold their breath until they get the 3 months. And then after that, then they can relax because they know it's harder for them they really have to find a sackable offense.
Sure, but at least in the dentist field, you can't really fake 7 years of experience. I mean, if you've been there for only a month or two, or only had half a year experience, and the doctor tells you to do something and you don't know how to do it, you're out the door the next day.
That's a field though that's very attuned to you're able to find that out very, very quickly. Whereas there's other fields that it takes kind of more of an ambient amount of time to get a clearer sense of the person. And sometimes also going back to dating, it's the same. Some people aren't quick studies, or their environment doesn't allow them to study the person and get an accurate view of them. But yeah, I'd agree. It's something like dentistry, a very technical field. You're able to discern whether or not someone's suitable or not. Whereas other fields, they can. Other fields require the basics, and then a lot more of kind of fitting into the group, the social dynamic, being able to play the political game, the business game, doing what you're told. They don't need a high level of skill. They need a moderate level. So all industries are the same. When you're applying those standards.
Yeah, well, that's part of the problem, isn't it? Because a lot of the times you can just kind of go to work like a duck through water. Like there are a lot of positions out there where there are 2, 3, 5 people in the company that are kind of gliding along. They're not really doing anything, and nobody really knows what they're getting paid for. And if you get into one of those positions, you just do your best to always pretend that you're working and that you're doing something. I'm sure you've encountered those people in the workplace.
Yeah, all these nuances. This is what real life's about. Like, imagine someone who's a lot lazier. They don't do much work, but they've got a very volatile attitude. They're overly confident and they're very vocal. You stay away from them and you give them a lot of rope because you don't want an uncomfortable environment. Whereas someone who's quiet and nice, you're going to judge them more on their abilities, and you're not going to stay away from them because of their personality. So their personality imbues how you treat them and whether or not you're able to fire them. So if you're a nice person who's a manager, you will find it harder to fire someone or manage someone who's much more confident than you. So there's all of those little kind of factors, but that's getting away from the subject anyway. Where was it? There was a comment by Chris. He says, how about physical fitness double standards for military fitness? Is it not like a golf handicap? Yeah, well, they're objective double standards because a person has an objective ability above or very different from the other person, and the person with the more exact physical ability, or say a person with a higher IQ or ability to think in a certain way, it demolishes another person, then you can't accept both of them politically. The job or the situation requires you pick another one if you want that job to be performed in a very high fashion. So physical is an example of that. The physical world, there's no two ways about it. You want that weight lifted. If you want 50 kilos lifted and you look at two different people, you know which one you'd pick and which one you wouldn't. And you can make the decision politically, or you can make it realistically, and be damned with politics. Politics is sort of like a gaslighting game, as far as I can tell. And a lot of the problems in the dating world and social environments and things like that between people, I think it's just all down to that political word salad where everyone's trying to survive through gaslighting. Whereas when you need to apply it to the world and it doesn't work, you can whine all you want like a 5-year-old. It doesn't really matter.
Mm. Well, I only see physical fitness double standards if they're throwing the men and women together. If you have different platoons and one platoon is women only and the other one is men only, then I don't have an issue with it. It's like separating people in the Olympics. Yeah, you're not going to expect a woman to lift as much as a guy does. But when they're fitting them together and saying, well, one of you needs to lift less, yeah, that's when I see it as a double standard and as a problem.
Big Ol says the reasonable double standard isn't actually a double standard. X is only a double standard if there are different expectations from an identical pair, i.e. the son and the daughter aren't identical. Yeah. You're going to be less worried about your 5-year-old son as you are going to be worried about your 25-year-old son out in certain environments. That's whereas the political thing is, well, they're both human beings and they both should be the same. And this is the thing where we're trying to force people to be the same. There's a difference between a level playing field and respecting everyone else and not holding anyone back and not being a bigot and things like that. But if you are choosing A or making choice A with this person, but choice B with another person, and that choice is reasonable, I think that's where the political side comes in and intrudes with word salad and tries to force them to be equal when they're not, and they create all this mess. As I said, you try and be reasonable with the girl and warn her about, well, if you do this, these are going to be the consequences. And then they say, well, why is it different for you guys? It's like, well, do it then. But then later, stop whining and saying the world needs to change and it's men's fault. It's like, it's your fault. You went out there, despite the warnings of your grandfather and your so-called patriarchal warnings, you went off and did what you wanted. Here are the consequences that happened to you. It's a high chance it's going to happen to you, not to me. And it's not luck. It's an unequal double standard that's meant to keep your life tranquil or happier. Like, I've got less of a chance of getting a negative result going out into the world in a certain way compared to a woman. Sorry, it's just the way it is. But there's also advantages that women have that men don't have too. Both have trade-offs. But in this fight to make everyone equal, I just think it's the practical side of the world is like kicking people in the stomach. But I think it's up to people to say, I don't care what your political standards are. My objective ones are going to be what they are, and I'll be responsible for them. Like, yes, they are unfair double standards between my son and my daughter, but if I want to protect my son and my daughter, I'm going to apply unequal, ostensibly unfair double standards that are reasonable. Hardemus says, responsibility exists if attached to authority. Yeah, not necessarily. I just need to think of politics. Can we discuss the difference in expectations around bedroom prowess? What? How? Why? Well, biologically speaking, I think the unfair expectations in the bedroom are probably more biologically wired, unless someone's imposing their own kinks and politics. But then again, you would hope that you'd work that out beforehand. Someone else just said my mic is a bit low. Okay. It's a bit low. Okay. Is it low for other people? It's coming in fine for me. Anyway.
It's good. It's good on my end. I can hear you perfectly.
Yeah, it's on my levels. It's matching yours. So anyway, Brian, thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it. He says, "Subhuman, big fan. This money is because I like the video that you made about leftover women and their stupidity. God bless." Which one was that? Was that the expired lottery ticket video?
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, that was years. I think that's on my Odyssey channel, because I got rid of a lot of those that were generating a lot of, let's say, negative comments under the video that would have gotten my channel banned. And also that was many years ago. But yeah, still, look, I don't disagree with many of those views. I've just kind of tempered them with maturity. But let's see.
I'm still waiting you to deal with the bedroom question.
Again, that's a subjective one. What am I supposed to say there? The inequality there. Look, objectively, if you want to stand up for something you think's unfair, like an unfair expectation on you, like you expect certain things, but she won't do anything, or she expects you to be a man, a quote unquote, in a cliche macho way, but the moment you expect her to be a woman in a cliche feminine way, like she doesn't want to, again, that's an unfair expectation. And that's a double standard as far as I'm concerned. But again, I would say I'd stress the initial meeting of the person and discerning what kind of person it is that you want to have in your life that you can trust. I think guys just accept the visual and their dreams about what they hope this person could occupy in their movie, in their head, their relationship movie. and then this is the tug of war they have with their partner in the bedroom, outside of the bedroom, out in social settings. We almost don't care who the person is. We are trying to force them into being someone, a fantasy object in our head. And I think that goes with the bedroom or not. What are your thoughts there, Karu? And keep it clean.
Can you turn me down lower a bit? Apparently, I'm the one that's too loud.
Ah, okay. There, I turned you down a little bit.
Well, I think the same person came back and asked who is supposed to be the dominant one in bed, and there's a simple answer to that: the one with the biggest strap on, whether it's natural or not. And to be fair, like this is one of the topics that I really don't care about. Like whatever works for you, as long as you both agree on what's going on there. That's the only thing that I care about. If you're having fun, you're enjoying yourself. Because here's the thing, I think I mentioned this in one of your other streams. Like the amount of time that you spend in the bedroom, and I'm talking about fun time rather than sleep time, it's really low. I know that there's the meme that Rolo likes to sell to everyone, like, oh, sex is the glue that keeps the relationship going. Well, it's not really, because that's not what you're doing 99% of the time. It's everything around that. I'm not saying that it's not important and that you shouldn't enjoy it, but at the same time, it's not the thing that you're going to do when you're 80 years old or 70 years old or 60 years old. A lot of the times you stop and you fall into routine and other things become way more important. I don't know. It's just it, and at the same time, when the question was asked about double standards in the bedroom, like who the hell cares? Like, it's a skill. Nobody's born a porn star, and just because you know how to please one girl doesn't mean she's going to like or enjoy the same things that another girl does. And just because a girl knows how to do certain things to you doesn't mean that another girl is open to doing the same things. It's about finding what works with the partner that you have, seeing how open they are to learning things about you, and vice versa. Like, if you come from the perspective of life being this porn-esque type of scenario where you order a pizza and you just get the extra sausage because that's how the menu works, that's not how life is.
Well, I was gonna use that analogy as well. People want it to be them ordering off the menu and getting a 10 out of 10 experience and exceeding their expectations. Whereas life isn't like that. The analogy doesn't fit. It's more like cooking your own meal with someone who's helping you, and then it's not ordering off a menu. Yes, it can be. You can get more of what you expect if you do the groundwork beforehand, if you talk a lot, if you're patient, you're not impulsive, you can defer your gratification. If you're kind of sober and you can get a realistic view of the person and take those incremental steps forward, you can get more of what you expect off the menu. But just because you read off the menu and you want a Michelin star meal served to you that blows your socks off, I think that's what people complain about, and to me it's ridiculous. And they won't communicate. They magically want to be surprised. They want this lottery win to come off the menu just because they ordered it.
And another aspect of that, and this applies across the board, both to men and women, I think that they both don't really like comparisons. They like this idea of, oh, I'm the best that she ever had, or she or her being, oh, he's the best that I ever had, and so on and so forth. And that's just not important. It's just so not important. If you look at most couples, a lot of the time the partner that they end up married is not the one that was the best in bed. A lot of the times your ex that was crazy was the best sexy time that you ever had, but you wouldn't go back to her no matter what happens. I have other things that I appreciate in the relationship that I have now. And yeah, maybe I'm not swinging from the chandelier and destroying the bed frame and whatever else like I used to do with my ex. But I think a lot of the time there are other compounding factors that make you believe that that was the best time you had in your life.
Well, this is
When
important. This is an important thing for people to really calm down and take a sober view of, is that in a relationship, especially, is you want to be accepted and you don't want an objection. So in the bedroom, you want to be on the same page with the person, and it effortlessly works, and you're both excited and you swing from the chandeliers. The reality is, it's unlikely that the person's going to be a mirror in expectations or like your porn star view of what you want it to be. The reality is you have to talk, and you have to there's trade-offs where you have to mitigate them by talking and telling them what you want and communicating, rather than people expecting this magical kind of bed of roses to be laid in front of them, and everything just is just a lottery win surprise. And the same in out of the bedroom. If you don't communicate and tell them what you want and the other person doesn't object, because this is the thing, these double standards are kind of, when people say, oh, well, that's not fair, how come I can do this and you don't have to, or I expect this and blah de blah. It's that you want your partner to have the same vision as you. You don't want a no from your intimate partner. In the bedroom, you want a yes. You don't just want a yes, you want a yes plus 10. And those things are unrealistic. And without communication, you can expect all you want. You can push back like a grumpy 5-year-old with your double standards. But I think your double standards are an excuse for not communicating who you are and what you want, especially initially.
Well, I think that this is one of the most important things that you can ask, because there's just so much emphasis going on the bedroom and body count and everywhere else. When was the last time you heard the question of, well, are you happy? Like, what does the sex matter if you're fucking miserable? It has no relevance on everything else, and the day to day is way more important. If you're happy, if you're content, if the interaction that you have in the bedroom or anywhere else is good, it's passable, you're learning, it's getting better. Maybe you reached a point where, you know what, it's good enough, I'm happy with this. Why does it have to be stellar? I don't understand this. Like, there are other things that keep me happy, not just the 5 seconds of fun that I have once every 4 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of you can be grateful that the person has a stellar aspect to them, whether it's in the bedroom or out of the bedroom, like a personality trait. That's icing on the cake. But the cake to me should be reasonable, should be kind of compatible, comfortable, reasonable things based on values that would keep you as a couple, partners, trusting, on the same page, things like that. It doesn't, they don't need to be, as you said, stellar in every aspect. And a lot of people say, well, I have high standards. Your standards are so high that they're ridiculous. Your standards are so high that you're guaranteeing that you'll stay alone, because you won't accept anything reasonable. And it's in effect, a lot of these people that have such high standards, what they offer to other people are nothing near the standards that they expect from the other person.
A lot of the times they're not even standards, they're just fantasy. How many times?
Think about just to touch on the example you made before. Say a guy that expects a woman to be really good at X in the bedroom, like a certain act, and that's his thing, and he expects that of her. But she also, say she wants to do that, or say she's naturally good at it, or she wants to please him in that way. And then she says, well, I want a guy who, like, my big thing is to be taken out to dinner once a week. I like fine dining. I like shopping. And he's like, no, I've got a hard rule against that. That's the unreasonable to me. It's like you can be grateful for a standard you're getting from her, or she wants to give you even better. That's more of she doesn't just come pre-packaged with it. She may be kind of neutral or open to it, and then she wants to please you or meet your standard. I think that's a good sign. But other people that don't want to reciprocally meet the other person's standard. And it doesn't need to be the same way. This whole male female thing, you might have a standard what you expect from the other person. If they reciprocate in a different standard that balances it out, that's all you need. You don't need to balance each other out. Like, I cooked a chef style meal last night, now it's your turn to cook a chef style meal tonight. That's to me political. That to me is not being a human being.
Yeah, but that kind of hits the nail on the head, because I don't like this type of I wouldn't even call it a double standard. Like this type of thinking that you need to have certain aspects that are stellar, and then you're supposed to improve all the other ones until they reach the same level. You're not perfect either. I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect out there. And you're never going to find a puzzle piece that's going to be the exact perfect combination of fetishes that you're going to have in the bedroom that's just going to work with you. Sometimes good enough is just good enough. You can't always just eat frosting. You also need to eat the cake. And the thing is, you need to enjoy all of the cake, not just the frosting. Like, there's a reason why some girls are called firecrackers. It's because they're nice for a couple of seconds, and after that, you don't want to see them again.
Yeah, they're all frosting. Well, let's be honest. I would say, myself included, usually there's a good combination in a cake. There's a nice amount of frosting and a nice amount of cake, but more than often, there's been more times where I've scraped off the icing because it's too sweet, or it's just doesn't suit the cake. But I'll never just eat the icing. It's very rare. There's usually a good cake where everything's in balance, but most of the time, that icing, you're happy to scrape it off and enjoy the cake, and that's, I think, what most people want.
Well, I just read a comment in chat. If I dated a girl and I knew she had a high body count, I would have to wonder and be concerned if I was what the guys in her past were. And that's something that I don't care about. Like, why do you care about the guys in her past? Like, first of all, they're in her past. They're not there. And comparisons you're going to have all the time. It doesn't matter if she's comparing you to her exes or to Elon Musk. She's still going to compare you to someone. You go sit next to a guy, she's going to compare your heights, your fitnesses, and she's going to do this without even being obtuse about it. It just happens. Oh, look, that guy's taller than you. It doesn't even have to be malicious.
Look, to be fair, I'm on the same page as you. I don't care about that. But if the guy feels that way, that's his standard, right? And as long as you can communicate it reasonably, someone else could be highly religious in a particular religion and saying, like, I just don't feel comfortable being with you because you're not X. You're not the same religion as me, and it's really important to me. It might not seem sensible, but if that's the person's primary motivator, or it's at the forefront of his brain with you, or whether it's, he's constantly thinking about comparison to her exes in bed, if he can't help that, it's going to be hell for her for years and years for him to maybe get over it, or maybe never get over it and waste years and years. So whatever the standard is, I think if you can communicate it fairly at the start and be honest with yourself and say, look, I really find it, I don't find it attractive when a woman has a high body count. As long as you're honest about it, and that standard is not coming from the manosphere or your mates, that your standard is actually yours. You feel it because it matters to you because of A, B, and C. So I think whatever your standard is, if you communicate it and the person takes it or leaves it, but hopefully your standard isn't political. It hasn't been conditioned by your stupid friends that are hampering you meeting a nice woman. And if you hadn't met your friends, you wouldn't have this standard that keeps pushing away compatible women. But anyway, that's kind of related, but I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, no, but that's exactly what the problem is, because if the stressor that the guy has isn't internal, isn't from his own person, and he's just taking it off out of someone's book or out of someone's video, then it makes no sense to even think about it.
Mm.
if it's just ideology that you're plucking out of somewhere. Like a lot of the things that you see in a lot of the Manosphere videos, I don't really give a crap about. I'm
Yeah.
looking at the person that I have in front of me, and unless I find something genuinely repulsive about the person that's in front of me, then I'm not going to care. I gave
Mm.
Boffin this example a while back. There was this old lady, and she was married about, I forgot, 10 times or something. There was an article written about her. And I started telling him this story, and the first thing that came to mind was the genuine manosphere answer of, oh, it's hypergamy. Like she tried to get married with 10 different men, and he took half their money and whatever the hell. Well, it turns out that this old lady, she'd been married for 40 or 50 or 60 years, I don't know, for a very long time. And she had a very big circle of friends, and obviously because they were old, they all started to die off. And because she didn't want to die alone and she had this huge circle of friends around her, she found someone again to get together with because she didn't want to be alone. And she married the other guy, and they had nothing to separate and whatever else. Turns out the guy, 2 months after he married her, the guy passed away. He buried the guy. What did she do after? She found another friend. She got married. She was with him for another year or two and whatever. And she was always the unlucky partner in this arrangement. And her husbands kept dying. But the woman just didn't want to be alone. Well, eventually she passed away too. But it's very enlightening when you look at the idea that goes through someone's head when they hear that story, just because of the rhetoric, right? Like, oh
Well,
no, she had to be a gold digger.
that brings me back to communication, because you come to the table with your knee-jerk reaction to something, and that's natural. You know, you see a bimbo walking down the street dressed provocatively, you already get an impression of her. You get a huge guy with tattoos up his neck and on his face walking down the street. You don't imagine he's articulate and well-read and a philosophy professor, or a professor of quantum mechanics or something. You don't. You got these natural assumptions. It's a primitive one to discern the environment around you and protect yourself from danger. That's a lion. That's a deer. They look different. Yeah, the lion, the deer could be aggressive and the lion could be passive. But you know what? Objectively and reasonably, I'm going to assume that the lion is aggressive and this deer is less dangerous. So there are natural instincts. And the same with that woman's story. The first reaction is, yeah, she got married 10 times. It's a natural assumption and it's a natural generalization. And I always defend generalizations. People say don't generalize. Why not? Until I know the person, you're supposed to generalize. It's a natural instinct. And what happens is, only when you find out, only when you sit down and turn the woman into Jane, that's when you'll actually be able to be reasonable. And it's happened to me in the past when I dated someone. She was married previously, and I already went in there defending against her being your typical single mum or divorcee, and what did you do to your husband? And then I find out he passed away, and she was a sweet person. And again, it only happens when you talk to someone. You can find out, you can temper your political defensive ideology to be right all the time and have perfection and have standards up here, while yours are still like a really nice 5-year-old guy. You really need to have that conversation. You need to talk. I keep stressing this. It seems like I'm a parrot, but your ability to kind of let go and communicate openly who you are, but not politically, will serve you really like better than anything else, better than any pickup lines, better than any checklist manosphere talking points to protect you against getting hypergamously like taken advantage of, and female, like all of that. Just open communication with a person, not excusing any red flags that pop up. Ask them when they pop up and be open about them. Don't hide from anything. And then you're able to discern the difference between an unreasonable double standard and a reasonable one. You basically learn to get along. And someone from the external can sort of say, well, you take out the bins, human, and why doesn't she take out the bins? And you can actually describe how you split up your roles and what you expect from the person here and there, and where you balance each other, and where, like, yeah, she does that, I don't do it, but that's not necessarily an unfair double standard. It's a role that she wants to take care of and be responsible for, and I appreciate that, and then I do something else. So in a company, you look at a company, no one does every single role. People have different roles and they rely on each other, and that builds trust and a relationship between your manager, the employee, between the accounting department and the engineering department.
Yeah, but the important thing there is that you took the time to turn all of the red flags and all of the things that you might have thought would be wrong with someone and then turn them into Jane.
Mm.
Because everything that you've said after that comes after the initial interaction between the two of you. And if you never have the openness to turn a bag of red flags or whatever you might see there into Jane, and then confirm that all of your assumptions were true or not, then it's irrelevant. Because you
Mm.
can sit here and talk about the science and the communication and everything else under the sun. If you never turn that random person into Jane and see what Jane has going for her, everything else doesn't matter.
Yeah. You know what it is? I think kind of people, the more you approach communication, especially, and dating, as though you're doing a layup in basketball, that's what should excite you. That's the way you should be playing, doing a layup, taking a very close shot with a high probability of it going in and it working. You know, you can miss it, rather than all this dating rhetoric that's nothing more than taking a full court shot from the other end of the basketball field, a basketball court, over your head, taking a blind shot, throwing the ball over your head, wanting it to go in, and it becomes a TikTok video. That's the kind of, like, that's what we all want. That's what everyone says they want, but that's stupid. That's just frustration after frustration. Whereas you need to get excited about the communication of a very close shot that goes in every time, because you're doing it with a high probability of it going in. I think people want excitement and to be stimulated much more than they want the actual things they talk about. Because a lot of this stuff that people are frustrated about in relationships especially, you can achieve them if you go about them in a very matter-of-fact, almost banal way. But everyone associates excitement and fairy tales around, like, the feel, like, you know, how am I supposed to have great feelings generated in a relationship if I go about them in a very mundane way? I want chocolate cake with sprinkles and cherry flavor and everything, but you're telling me I need to eat vanilla cake. Well, it's like, yeah, you do initially, and then you can add those ingredients later on. Bad analogy, but you get what I mean.
Yeah, well, I look at it from a different perspective because today I had the opportunity to meet one of my long-term friends, and he's been with a girl for years now, and I never had the opportunity to meet her. And just by accident, we met in a store today, and she was there with him. And all you needed was to take one look at this girl, and everything you said about people wanting excitement and everything else, none of this applied. You take one look at this girl and you can tell this girl's not on I can guarantee you that this girl is not on fucking Tinder. I can guarantee you that she's not doing the rat race that all of these people that are complained about on the internet are doing. And I think it's very easy to look at what's in front of you and say that this is the actual state of affairs,
Mm.
rather than genuinely knowing what's actually going on out there. Because if I look at a lot of my clients and the women that work for the businesses that I help, they're just regular people, man. Like
Mm.
you look at an average girl and you can tell she's an average girl. She's what you would expect her to be. Like not everybody's riding the roller coaster and sailing each weekend on a different yacht with a different millionaire and getting flown to Dubai and appearing on the Fresh and Fit podcast.
Mm.
Like that's not everyone's life experience. Most of these girls, they're just normal ass girls. It's just that I think a lot of the younger generation forgot what normal women actually look like because of Reddit and all of the other places that they frequent.
Yeah, yeah. If you're always consuming Disney, a Disney movie in your entertainment, it starts to kind of imbue into your reality. You can't. This is what romance is to you, and I think a lot of people that watch a lot of clickbait style TikTok videos or YouTube videos and stuff, and their whole view about relating to people is volatile, and that reality TV style men and women fighting. And then you see the kind of bimbos with the big lips and things like that. And it's like you associate love or trying to find love with that kind of volatile reality TV style friction, and everything else isn't exciting. So if you meet a normal girl, like you said, someone who's just kind of calm and they don't have that energy to you, it's like, it's not a turn on. You know, this person's just a,
Exactly. Oh, I didn't
but it's
like
your,
her at all.
yeah,
I
it's
looked
your
at
own
her and like,
fault.
nope.
Yep.
Yep.
It's your own fault. It's kind of like there's something to be said for, they say kind of men who get conditioned by like extreme porn. It's the same thing in the bedroom. Most people aren't going to be like that, especially if you don't communicate, but most of the time it's a fantasy. So it's the same with your just general normal personality that you would expect in a person on a date. If you're watching reality TV, TikTok videos, and you want that excitement, that energy, but somehow she treats you well, but she's a train wreck, but she cares about you and loves you and kisses you and she's great in bed, but she always has your back. That's a fantasy. That kind of volatility is so unpredictable. That's the enemy. That's not a friend you can trust. But it's entertaining. We can watch car crashes. For me, watching a lot of dating advice and the most popular dating shows and the reels and the little clips that they have is similar to a few years ago. When it was really popular to watch videos where people fall down a lot. You watch disasters and cars crashing. They're still popular. What are they called? They're called kind of like
Fails or internet fails or
internet
whatever.
fails.
Yeah.
It's like everyone's watching relationship fails and discussing them. And that's what they want as well. They want that interaction. They want that buzz. They want that. And so if you meet someone who doesn't fall down, who doesn't fail, it's like, well, I don't want to watch this. See you later. You're a nice person, but no thanks. I'm not getting the buzz from the. It's almost like they're subscribing to channels. It's like, I don't want to subscribe to this channel and watch it every day because you're not falling down and you're not loud and it's not ostentatious and you're not showing me your boobs or whatever. Like, I want the exciting stuff. Well, the exciting stuff has a lot of chaos and unpredictability. And if that's what you're conditioned and entertained by, guess what? That's your level, and that's what you consider love and relationship, because everything else just makes you fall asleep.
And don't get me wrong, I'm sure that she's a nice gal. I didn't even get to talk to her. We only said hello and whatever. I talked to the guy for 10 seconds or however long I was in the store, but it was impossible to get to know this person in that amount of time. It was just that everything is now so inflated in terms of value and what things are supposed to look like and whatever else, that just seeing a perfectly average girl isn't enough to look and say, well, I would go and talk to her, because to me she didn't look attractive at all. It's like, no, she's not. And I'm convinced that this guy finds her attractive because he's been with her for years now. Like she probably didn't just teleport in his bed and it was an arranged friendship or whatever. I'm convinced that he finds her attractive. But because of the types and the messed up standards that I have, I would never look at somebody like that and say, oh, this is somebody that I would go and talk to.
Well, again, it's on you. How much do you value? Where is the tipping point where you would want to consider someone for a relationship, or is your standard so high visually and kind of in the internet sense of what's attractive to you, that it makes it almost impossible for you to have a functional relationship with that person. You know,
Oh,
like most,
double G's, full lips, tattoos, probably a goth look.
yeah, like
Like
all of that
everything that
extremes.
everybody in chat hates.
Yeah, the fetishistic style stuff that you find a 10 out of 10 visually and kind of like a fetish. What's the likelihood you're going to have a very stable life with her, and she's not going to embarrass you in front of your family and friends, and she's going to have your back and you can rely on her? And it's, you know, you might get the lottery win, but having the lottery win as a reasonable high standard is ridiculous to me. You need to kind of temper a trade-off and say, well, look, in a relationship, I value X, but in the kind of fetishistic style of women that I find just physically appealing, that is like really at the bottom. The chances of me getting what I really value in a partner in that kind of woman is almost non-existent. So I have to be realistic about how I date compared to how I screw around.
Yeah, I was gonna ask something different, but it wouldn't be YouTube.
I just want to mention a comment by a super chat. Thank you again, Ryan. He said, you did, this is a guy that mentioned my previous video. He said, you did a great video on what female nature is like. You said it in the Titanic video movie. This money's for you because your mouth was open my mouth was open all day. I think that's the one where I sort of did the drawings of the man floating face down in the sea. Yeah, I think the video was something about why she wants you vulnerable. And I was talking about female nature. That was an old video.
That one's old too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm surprised I even remember them.
I remember them because I'm a visual person. I remember how I drew them and what the covers look like. And then I'm reminded of the topics inside. So without the visual, I find it very hard. I get family and friends saying, oh, you know, this person said hello. And they'll tell me their name and I draw a blank and they have to describe a scene or where I met them or who they were or what they look like. I have to get a visual of them for me to kind of snap into my memory.
God, I would hate that.
On this topic, I would just say, is the person being reasonable? Whatever your standards are, we've talked around it. There are objective standards you might have, double standards, reasonable or unreasonable. But once you meet someone, you need to talk to them and see if what you once had as a very firm rule or standard, or what a double standard might be to you, you meet a person that's very fair and compatible with you, then all of a sudden your double standards change, or your standards for men and women change because there's a very acceptable trade-off. This person is really high in traits that are at the top of your pyramid of compatibility and what you need from a person, right? And so a lot of the other double standards and standards that you might have had now really don't matter too much because they're not threatening and the person is very reasonable about them. So it's really what you can live with. I did a poll as well where I asked which relationship ultimatum or double standard annoys you the most. And I gave examples. The one that got the top mark was when they say a real man, boyfriend or partner would ... The second one was if you loved me, you ... which I think are the same. They kind of the same comment to me. The other one was, don't you want this for us too? That got the least amount of likes, but that's the one that I clicked because I had that happen to me where I've generally talked a lot and I've been open about what I want. And I've had that kind of tried to be manipulated to me. Like they want something and they want to guilt trip me or shame me into being a bad person because I don't naturally want something that's normal. So whether it's, when are we moving in together? Do you want to get married? Do you want to have kids? And if I have a no or a not now, maybe later, and they want it now, or they want me to be someone else, they'll say things like, well, a normal person would want this in a relationship, or don't you want this for us? Like, let's buy a house together. It's like, no, I don't want to do that. well, don't you want this for us? Or she wants to go on a trip. That's a good example. I've had that a few times. Let's go on a holiday here. And I don't want to go. And I'll say, not now. I can't afford it now, maybe next year or whatever. And they get pouty and they say, well, don't you want this for us? I want this for us. It's like, no, you want this for you. You don't care about my opinion. If I don't agree with you, you come back with, well, this is for us. No, it's not. Any more than a shopping trip and I'm following you around. I'm doing it for you. I'm not doing it for us. And I think women, a lot of women put this whole, well, it's, I don't want to be responsible for asking for something. I want to go shopping and I want him to want it like I do, so I don't have to take responsibility for asking him for something, because later on, then you can ask them for something reasonably and say, well, I went shopping, I watched that romantic movie with you. I would like you to come watch my sporting event or watch this science fiction movie. And she's like, no, I don't want to do that. It's like, oh, I didn't want to go shopping either, but I did it because of how I felt about you. And I think I got a bit of that, trying to gaslight me into doing things in a way that I should want as a couple, whereas really she just wanted to do something she wanted to do and wanted to arm wrestle me into it. And then the other item was, I don't have to do this. For me, it's different. And I've seen both men and women do this. I saw this a lot on the Fresh and Fit podcast. Whenever a more sensible woman would have a comment of, well, how come you get to have this standard, but a woman, you expect this standard from a woman? That's not fair. And Myron's response was always like, well, men and women are different. And he'll always go to biology, like Genghis Khan kind of rhetoric, like, well, I'm the man and I'm the warrior and I can do this and we're promiscuous and, men produce 1 million sperm every few minutes, whereas women produce eggs every blah and they're out of commission.
Too bad they don't produce brain cells, they just produce sperm.
Yeah, but, and then what are your thoughts on that anyway? Which double standard annoys you the most, either that you've experienced, Karu, or that you hear a lot of?
Well, I think that the only double standard in your poll is the don't you want this this for us too? I don't have to do this for me, it's different. Those I view as double standards. The other two can be very reasonable. It depends what comes after the ... Because now it's 2023, and if you say, well, a real man would have a penis, well, I think that that's pretty kind of reasonable, right? And the second one, if you loved me, if you loved me, you wouldn't pull a scene when you visit my family just because they said something that would annoy you. And I think that that's a reasonable thing to say too. It depends what comes after the ... because a lot of the times when those lines were used either towards me or I would use them towards someone, they were a reflection, not necessarily of a double standard, but of something that was going against my expectation of the other person. Like if for example, if I took when I took one of my exes to my parents' house for the first time, I knew that there were certain things about her appearance that my parents wouldn't like and they would probably comment on. Now, I had the expectation that she wouldn't spurg out and that she wouldn't act like a little kid when these things were pointed out to her. And that there's enough respect both for my folks and for her to not act like a petulant child and to try to say X, Y, and Z and to try to shame my parents into accepting her life choices or tattoos or whatever she had showing off at the time. And luckily enough, the girl that I did this with, she didn't do anything, and she was very, very charming about the whole situation. But then I see a very reasonable thing to tell her that if she acts out, well, if you would have actually cared about me or if you would have loved me, you would have went for half an hour of being a bit uncomfortable without acting like a fucking kid. Oh, if it was somebody else and if it was maybe a friend of mine, yeah, I wouldn't have cared if you spurred out. But when we're talking about my parents or something that's important to me, I expect you to have enough social awareness to not make yourself look like a fool and not make me look like a fool for picking you.
Yeah. There's a difference between asking someone to change their opinions, their beliefs, who they are, and things like that. And there's a difference between telling someone, yeah, I know you're this way, but my family are old fashioned, or when you go to work, you need to dress in a certain way. You can't just say, well, I'm going to dress any way I want. Like, there's a certain standard that's expected of you. And if you cared about me or your job, you kind of, is it that important that you can't temporarily just, because really, if you care about someone else or you really care about your job, having a trade-off to get the totality of benefits from that boyfriend or that job, does everything have to be a benefit to you? Can you not give anything of yourself? Can you not, is there never a trade-off? Is it always how you feel and what you want, and that's empowerment to you? That is the basis of your self-esteem? To me, that's very childish.
Well, not necessarily, because looking back at the same partner, if she would have told me that, well, you know what, a real boyfriend would go to concerts with me, she would have had a point, because I never went to any concert with her. And it's a reasonable expectation to have of someone that's your boyfriend or your partner. I don't think that that's unreasonable. I was just being a spurg and taking the whole manosphere pill by heart at the time. So context is really important when you use those types of lines, because again, if it's something that you jump at you jump at every situation, and it doesn't matter what happens. Well, a real boyfriend would take the trash out. Well, a real boyfriend would have energy when he comes back home. If you use that as a crutch for everything, then it becomes a manipulation tactic, and it's something unreasonable. But if it's put in the context of, well, this is a problem, and if you were serious about this, then you would do Y or Z because you haven't done it in the past, and it's something important that we should do together. Even if it causes you discomfort, you can make a sacrifice once every 2 months and come with me to this place. Then I think that it's completely reasonable, and you should definitely do that.
Yeah, I agree. I think people, I mean, some of it is based on past trauma, that the only way they can deal with it is to say, well, next time I go into a relationship, I'm never going to back down from anything. Everything's going to be my way, and I never want to feel taken advantage of or lost or humiliated or anything. And the best way to do that is it's always going to be about me, and they either be all in my frame or nothing. I'm not going to be with the person, and they can frame it around, well, he needs to respect me. And to them, respect means you do everything my way. And anything I don't like, I don't have to like. And if you try and make me like, we're breaking up. I think that was one of the comments as well that was left under, I'll read a few of them out. David said, a real man would. Yeah, that's the common one, I think. I'm kind of torn between number 1 and number 2 in the poll. There was also, where was the other comment? I want to, I'll read it out here. Here, I think it's here. Here we go. My mother spent $11,000 on a vacation in May and became enraged when my father brought a classic car for $7,000 in August. She makes $15,000 a year while he makes $100,000 a year. That vacation has no resale value and hardly any personal value to her, while he expects to flip the car for a profit. WTF is she complaining about? Yeah. Real men fill in the blank is the ultimate gaslighting phrase. I agree. All of this, well, if you love me, you would, or a real man would, or looking at you really weirdly because you're not doing what they want you to do. Someone said child support. My dad had to pay it even though we lived with him. Yep, that was a double standard. That's a political one as well.
Yeah, that's a disgusting one. I got enraged when I heard that.
Yeah, but let me read some out here that I copied onto the screen. Epoch says, if a man cheats, he's a jerk. If a woman cheats, he's a neglectful jerk. See, this is one of these ones that is a real double standard. That you can point to biology, like I'm sure the Fresh and Fit crowd do, and say, well, we're wired to spread our seed, whereas women aren't. But that's an excuse to me. You can, if you know your relationship will have less friction if you if you need to sleep around with a lot of women, be open and upfront with the woman. And if you just can't get anyone to be with, then sorry, that's what you've chosen, because no one likes to have a partner that's screwing around behind their back while you have a standard of faithfulness while they have a standard of sleeping around and non-committal. You both either need to be casual and non-committal, or you both need to be committed. I think the friction comes where, actually, no, I was veering off topic there. This double standard is when one person cheats, they have an excuse, but when the other person cheats, there's no excuse there. That's an obvious double standard. Women expect men to be emotionally available, and when we are, they leave saying you're too emotional. Yes, this is another example of, I want you to be a certain way, but I want it to magically be exactly the words and phrases and the kind of person I want. I'm not going to tell you what. And depending on my mood, I might need a little bit more of this or a little bit less. But again, there's no standards. So you have to guess that you're emotional enough, or, less emotional. Or when she wants an open guy, how open does she want you? And in what areas does she want you open? Whereas, because if you're open in certain areas, like crying all the time, then most women don't like that. But if you're open in terms of expressing exactly what you want, and you're kind and fair about things, even if you might be blunt, women might respect that a lot more. So it's not just a blanket, I want an open emotional guy. It's how and where. And again, that comes through discussing with the person.
Yeah, I think that one's a bit more complicated because I think it also relates to the insecurities that the other person has. Like, whether we like to admit it or not, you get some form of security from your relationship, whether it's financial, whether it's emotional, whether it's anything else. And depending on the things that you're honest about or emotional about, you can cause distress within the other person. It's not necessarily about being open, but being open can also cause the other person to have a very unsafe base and realize that, oh, well, maybe I'm not as safe as I thought I was. Because if you start being open about financial issues, it's like, oh, well, we can't handle the car payments anymore and the house payments, and suddenly the stress goes up. And then you start complaining over and over again. Yeah, you can be too emotional. I think it depends a lot on the topics that you allow yourself to be open and emotional about.
I think if you're constantly talking and communicating, the person will get a sense of how you're talking about your emotions. Whereas if you're just emoting, the person's going to interpret it from their biases. So if they don't like a guy crying for no reason, it doesn't make sense, then really your human impulses of, I don't like that reaction, without any context, that you'll just go with that. It's like, I don't like a person crying or screaming or upset. Whereas if you talk and you understand that the person, there must be a reason for it, and you understand the reason, or they talk to you about it, you're more likely to not have the primal reaction. You're much more likely to have a kind of understanding reaction based upon communication. So a lot of these reactions are just primitive, but if you talk, they can kind of be tempered.
I don't think that they are, because that type of criticism comes after the relationship has been established. Like, oh, you're not emotional enough usually isn't a thing that's going to be said on the first date or the first week. You usually run into that either weeks or months down the line. And at that point, you've already pre-established yourself to be quote unquote stoic, or however you present yourself to be, and then the person has to deal with the flood of, oh, this person gets emotional about X subject. I don't find that to be appealing.
Mm.
And I think that's where the problems kind of intervene, because if you would have been open with this from the start, you would have filtered that person out of your life way, way, way earlier. Like, oh, this person likes to complain about finances, but that's not my thing. Screw this, I'm out after the first couple of dates. But if you keep it in you for a year or two, and then you suddenly start complaining about the other things that trigger the other person, like, well, what do you expect to happen then?
Yeah, I think most of the problems, and I'm reflecting on myself especially here, is that I never really got to develop a strong sense of the person. That's why I could go no further, or I could never trust them. But the more you communicate and you're open initially, you're able to kind of quickly start to see how compatible and how well you fit. So then later on, if a person kind of spontaneously reacts a certain way, it'll still be within character because you assess their character accurately at the start. It kind of it foundationed itself within the relationship that no matter how they react, even if they come up with a double standard, you will understand it from their perspective, given the character assessment you've already had of them, the trust of the character assessment. But most guys just don't. Most guys and girls don't talk. They don't communicate. They spend their time doing things, going places, in the bedroom, watching movies, like a lot of externally distracting stuff that just kind of it's like a treadmill that a couple can just get on and it takes them. But I think that the greatest sense you can have of the person in all their reactions, like when we've had a disagreement, how do we react? Like I know her character when we have a disagreement. I know her values on children. I know her values on life and death and introversion, extroversion, doing this, doing that, socializing, not socializing, politeness, where her limits are. Like you get a whole sense of her. So then later on, when you see a reaction that you've never seen before, it's still within character. And I don't think a lot of people really find out or want to find out the person's holistic character. They see what they want to see. They don't want them to leave. They want to freeze this fantasy moment. They don't want to talk about anything that might shatter it, because this might be the best looking person they've been with, or this might be the richest person they've been with. This might be the person that makes them feel more secure financially or structurally, or they've got a great lifestyle that really is the fantasy that they wanted, and they don't want the lifestyle to go away, whatever it might be. But the thing is, you're only going to have a relationship within the limits of that thing, and you won't trust them in anything else. And you're always going to be worried that what will happen when we have a fight? What happens if I get pregnant? What will their reaction be? What happens when we go to church with his family? Like all these things. And I don't think a lot of people have very arm's length relationships. So the reality of incompatibility or compatibility can fully be seen.
Well, I'll give you a hot take now, and I'm gonna burn the bridges with the manosphere. I don't think that you should posture the alpha. I'm not saying show up as the worst version of yourself. I'm not saying don't take care of yourself. But when it comes to interacting with someone, don't try to pretend to be something you're not. Like, complain about the things that you usually complain about. Act the way that you're normally acting. Like, don't curse as much as you usually curse, and maybe don't use certain trigger words that you might use when you're in private. But talk about the same things that you talk about with your friends. Like, I have never seen you act differently regardless of who you talk to.
Me.
And if somebody likes you, they like you for who you are. They're not, oh, well, I like Human because he treats me a certain way, and then the other person he treats a different way. No, you treat all of the people, as far as I can tell, the same. And any woman that interacts with you, she has to pick, and she has to quote unquote fall in love with human with the way that he's acting with everybody. And if that's not for her, well, that fucking sucks. Because the person that's genuinely gonna like you, she's gonna like you the way you are.
Well, for me,
Yeah,
it's
maybe you're a bit nicer to her and whatever else, because that's natural. But on average, you're the same guy. You don't act like $1,000,000 when you talk to, I don't know, when you talk to Stardust, and then when you talk to me, it's like, oh well, I'm talking to this random dude.
Oh, look, you kind of you dial down and up certain parts of your personality and your brain, given who you're interacting with. In the same way, you talk to someone who's elderly, you talk to a child, you talk to different friends with kind of different experience, and certain people you can open up different avenues of discussion with. But yeah, generally, I always remember that I didn't like how I felt when I was trying to be someone else, when I was trying to impress in a caricature version, when I was trying to put on a suit that was just there to impress them. And so mine was like, I didn't enjoy my dates when I went there being not me. Obviously, you go there being a bit more, say, objectively polite with who you are, because you don't know the it's arrogant to assume that you can kind of tell jokes and be as crass with the person you just met. Like there's a level of politeness.
Yeah,
So
but that's social decorum. I'm more referring to the topics that you engage in, to the way that you speak. Like you're not going to switch from pretending to be an evolutionary psychologist with someone and then going back to being human when you're with everybody else. That type of distinction. Like you kind of act the same way. You're as relaxed with everybody else. Sure, there's a level of social decorum. You're obviously going to be more respectful with someone elderly. You're going to interact with your missus differently than a random person on the street, and so on and that's natural for everyone. Or at least you would assume that the newer generations understand that type of acting as well. But the core of who you are, don't try to pretend that you're that you drive a Ferrari and that you have a multi-billion-dollar business and you're some form of sex god when you're just an average dude. Just act the way you act with your friends.
I think in today's generation, and I'm kind of older than you, I think they live in a world where they can be literally anyone they want to be online. They can put on any avatar, they can talk anyway, and no one's going to find out any differently. You can convincingly from a distance have a social a digital persona, and it's accurate because it doesn't need to be proven. You never have to go to coffee with like, if you have friends online, I never have to turn up in my Bugatti to pick you up, Karu, to go for a coffee. Therefore, I have a Bugatti and you can't say anything about it, because what do you know? I can have one if I want. I can be as confident as I want. I can have ridiculous values if I want. They never have to be applied in the real world. They never have to be real. So I think a lot of people have they really believe they have this freedom of becoming any fantasy they want, and then also their standards match their fantasy, and it doesn't matter if it's realistic. Even more so, to excuse not even going on dates, or to excuse, I just can't find anyone for me. It's because you enjoy living in your fantasy world. Your life is largely your digital self and not your analog self. But that's another topic.
Yeah, but that's because you're so alpha and you just have so many women around you, but somehow you just can't date any one of them, and none of them just happen to meet your standards.
Well, the topic that should be talked about, and I know it's not talked about because it's boring, instead of like how to become alpha or how to get the women or how to get $1 million, it's like, just how do you be fair? How can you just be polite? How can you have a conversation? How do you treat the person like a decent human being? How do you apply the golden rule? It's always, how do you be someone else that you're not? How do you aspire to? Yes, there's something good about being the best version of you, but I think people are making themselves into the best version of someone else that, in the end, it kind of looks like you, but you're pantomiming that. It's not really you. You're not showing up as you. You're showing up as such a polished version of what you could become that a person gets the false impression of you. And then after that initial honeymoon period where you can't keep the act going, they've got every right to dump you. You would as well. I've talked about the sort of honeymoon period, and guys will agree, these women that put up a show to reel you in and get you to fall for them, and then you feel like you've been duped later. And of course you're pissed off and you have problems and you eventually break up because they've lied to you. But the same is in reverse. If you're a guy that shows up impressing a woman in a way that's nothing to do with you, that your friends and family never see, and they see, who's this guy? And there's a lot of cliche examples of guys saying their buddy, he rocks up with his girlfriend, then all of a sudden he doesn't act like their friend anymore. He's like, who's this guy now? Like, why are you acting like that, Frank? It's the same thing. You just show up as you, which is boring to most people because it doesn't sound like it's impressive, but that says more to me about people having self-shame and thinking they're not good enough. Then it has to do with, this works in the dating market. No, it's not that. It's that you don't think you're good enough, or you think you're subpar unless you turn up as someone else with a Ferrari and money and saying all the right lines. You don't say your lines, you say perfect lines that mesmerize somebody. It's like, it's stupid. It's really dumb because I can never relax. Because once I've said my lines, what am I going to say? Keep searching on the internet for more lines to continue the relationship?
Yes. You'd be surprised how many times that happens. You'd be surprised how many times somebody receives a witty line and then they Google how to respond to X witty line. And I think that that's what a lot of guys do nowadays. And I think that the more important question is how do you become happy? Because ultimately, it's not about getting your happiness from somebody else. It's about being happy with yourself, or at the very least being content with yourself. And it seems that a lot of younger guys anyway, and some older guys, really don't find contentment within themselves and with what they have in life. And don't get me wrong, sometimes there are legitimate reasons for that, and sometimes there aren't. I looked at Spetsnaz's newest video. I don't know if you had the time to watch it. And if we ever get to talking to him, I do want to ask him a couple of questions because he gives me I don't want to say a distorted sense of hope, but it gives me a distorted sense of him assuming that there is value across the board for males, and I think that that's a bit disingenuous. But I do think that the main issue for any generation, not just for the current generation, is having a level of contentment with yourself without trying to pump yourself up. I mean, just waking up and you know what, things are fine. I don't have a Bugatti, I don't have a six-pack, but you know what, things are good. They're all right. And everything that comes to me, they can make it better. If they make it worse, well, whatever. I'm gonna come back to the mean at one point. But everything good, regardless how minute, is just going to improve my life.
Yeah, I would push back a little bit with the idea of happiness, because I've always thought of happiness as a result, not as something to get. It's kind of the result that comes after doing things the right way. And I would say it's more important, instead of like learning the lines or learning how to manipulate someone to get what you want, and I know a lot of guys have been burnt by giving too much, but I think you're burnt by giving too much when you're naive. The older you get and the more experience you get, I think there's less of an excuse. Then I think you still need to, and this is what I believe in now, is that you need to treat people well and then pay attention to whether it's reciprocated. If it's not, then you can make a decision. See you later. You're not a nice person. You're not fair. You're one-sided. You've got unfair, what's it called? Unrealistic expectations and double standards, right? So for me, it's treat them well, be kind, especially to the person you say, and I put it in quotes, you say you love them, but do you really? So you have to treat them well and do the things you know that might put a smile on their face or that they appreciate, big or small, if you've chosen to be with them, if they're the right person for you. And then if it doesn't come back, if they're always not doing it for you, or a real guy should do this, and you go, okay, you know, I care about you. I want to do this for you. You want to do it. You do it. And then when you want something in return, which generally with guys is less, we need less from a woman. And if she's kind of like, well, I don't want to do that. I just don't feel like it. It's like, okay, really? Like, I always want to do something for you. I'm always kind, but you never want to do it because, you know, you're an individual. It's like, that's the assessment and the dynamic that really should show you whether it works or not. Not trying to make them happy. It's wanting to do something for them because you care about them, and then paying attention if it's reciprocated. And you'll start to notice when it's not. All the other stuff, I think, is a consequence, or interesting sort of little forensics in terms of like what happens around the dating world. But just focus on, if you really like this person, know why, and you're communicating. And then someone always has to say the first thing, or offer a gift, or say a kind word, or express or do something for the other person, right? And I know myself, I enjoy that. I feel good when I do something for people I care about, especially for my woman. But if it didn't come back, if she refused to do anything that I would like her to do for me, or put a smile on my face, if it's just all, well, I don't do that, I don't like that, and it's nothing more than, well, I just prefer not to, and that's good enough, and I'm never doing it, well, it's like, okay, then I'm not doing anything for you anymore. It's like, I feel like a fool, and it's blatantly unfair, because a lot of the stuff a guy does for a woman, he doesn't do for himself. He does it because he cares about it. I think it's, women don't like owing men something, and maybe they just don't like doing things for guys, because a lot of them don't really like guys. They just like the guys doing things for them. But again, that's another story.
Yeah, well, I want to push back against that a bit, because you said treat people nice, and I disagree with that, because I don't treat people nicely. I treat them how they deserve to be treated. Like, you need to be somebody that's either earned my respect, or that I need to have a reason to be nice to you. And what you said with, I agree. Like, if that's the person that I want to spend my life with, and whatever else, then I agree. My default stance on that person is that I'm going to be nice to them. But as a general rule, it's a lot healthier, at least in my opinion, to treat people exactly how they deserve to be treated. And sometimes that doesn't mean to be nice to them. It actually means quite the opposite.
Sure, but initially I'm saying one of you has to extend the olive branch and say something. When you go on a date, if you can sense that immediately there's a bit of quiet, someone has to start talking. And if you feel that impulse, I'd say there's nothing wrong with you generating that conversation, rather than both of you sitting back with your arms crossed, expecting to be loved or communicated to. I really believe a lot of this stuff is an act, not in an act in a bad sense, like an action. So if I want a good relationship, I have to act in accordance with that. I have to act like I want to treat her well, because that's what I want in the relationship. And then I see if it's reciprocated. And then if you had that nice feedback loop happening. But you can't sit back there magically hoping that, like, you keep getting lottery wins in your love life or your relationships. You have to go out there and visit someone first, and pick up the phone and call them and say hello, be polite. You have to do that initially, especially if it pops up in your head. If you're always, and I agree, like later on, if it's not reciprocated, or the person's rude, or they've shown you they don't deserve respect, I agree, walk away, treat them as equally as they're treating you. I get it. But I think initially you need to take responsibility for what you want. So you have to generate the kind of relationship you want. And if it's not coming back, then you're wasting your time.
Yeah,
That's
you made me mellow out on this topic because I think I've mentioned this to you before. When I interact with someone for the first time, to me they started from the person of a retard, and then they have to prove to me that they're not. That's how I usually started all my interactions. But you've kind of mellowed me out in that regard. So now I'm
you turn
starting from
up.
the position of maybe they're not.
You turn up to a date like a feminist, like every guy's guilty until they prove themselves innocent.
No, well, with a date, it's a bit different because I'm usually horny and I only go to talk to people that I'm attracted to. So I have a higher incentive to be to be nice.
Well, look, I think in the past I've been overly nice, but one benefit from that is that I've always gone there expecting them just to be kind of neutrally a normal person. I don't expect them to be, fall for me or hug me as their best friend immediately, but I go there as a polite person with giving them every opportunity to see the nicest version of the genuine me, me saying what I want and being excited to see them or go on a date and be happy to be there with the potential of what this might be as just two people being open and friendly and stuff like that. But I never go there defensive. Not never. I used to go there more defensively with all my preconceptions and manosphere bullshit and stuff. But I think it's beneficial to all of us to, if you want something, start generating it first. Say the things, do the things. But if the person doesn't reciprocate, and you're telling them, it's like, oh, I would like this, or that's not fair. I did that for you. Like, I think this is a reasonable request, and you don't want to do it. And there's always pushback. The giving is one way. The intent is always one way, and they're just sitting there with their arms crossed, wanting to receive everything. Then if you notice that, you need to make that assessment, because I certainly did, and it made my interactions and wasting less time with the wrong people. It improved a lot of that for me. So I'm just saying, there needs to be someone to make the first steps, do the first things, offer the kindness first. And if I want something, I will do it first, and I'm happy if it goes nowhere. But my trick where I had to learn was not to give too much. So I'm always going to be open. I'm always going to assume good intent, especially if I've chosen this person, or I want to be there, or I want it to maybe become something because it's giving me all the signs it might be. I have to go there with that posture. I can't go there defensively with a negative mindset and expect it to turn out positive.
Well, human, if you were a true stoic, you wouldn't have to expect anything and you would never ask for anything. You would just be happy with what you get. So shame on you for not being a real man, because a real man wouldn't expect anything.
I wouldn't be attached to anything. I wouldn't be dependent on anyone. Like I always, I kind of joke, but it's kind of serious in a sense. I'll say to Stephanie, like, yeah, this is a codependent relationship. It is where we both give we both work with each other, and we try to make the other person sort of smile and do the things what the other person wants. And like, we know what works. So there is, because when you give, you get stuff back as well. But to think that you can kind of just sit in your own little bubble and you can be detached from anything, expect nothing, and live in this very cold clinical way where, I don't know, it's kind of like, it's a very, I've always been suspicious of pushing that Buddhist extreme right to kind of a really unfeeling, robotic way of being. To me, it's like, why the hell do you want a relationship then if there's not a healthy level of codependence where you can depend on them to be a certain way? Like, I depend on her to have my back in a certain way and to trust her. I depend on her to trust her in a certain way because she's earned that. What, am I supposed to not rely on anything? Is she supposed to be supposed to treat her like a goldfish where I forget who I know she is every day and expect nothing? Don't count on her for anything. Don't know what kind of conversations I'm going to have with her. It's a bit, it's never sat well with me.
Well, the biggest delusion that seems to permeate a lot of these online spaces is that people are independent, and they just don't realize that everything is a relationship and a codependency. Even the things that they have around them, even the water that comes out of the pipe, it's a codependency. Whether you like it or not, you're dependent on the people that make the water run. You're dependent on the people to get the electricity to your house, to get the food to your door, to your Walmart or wherever else. You're a lot more intertwined with the system than you would like to agree. Even the ones that go into the forest and they say that they're going monk mode or whatever the hell, like the language you're using is still the language of the people of where you grew up. The skills that you've learned, the math, everything else, you've almost had no independent realization of your own, unless you're working in research, and that's the minutia of the population. So all of the skills and everything else you've got through codependence. And then to come out and say, well, I don't want to be codependent with my woman, I don't want to have anything, yeah, that's being delusional.
Yeah. Okay. Any final words on the topic of double standards, Karu?
Not particularly. As I said, if I haven't had a lot of those in my life, it's hard for me to comment on them. I think I've touched upon everything that I could say on the topic.
I would just like to offer just a general blanket statement in terms of whether it's a fair or unfair standard. Is that one, whether it's reasonable to you, the subjective nature of relationships, what you can live with, is the primary thing you should be gauging, whether or not you're comfortable with it. As we've mentioned over and over again, whether it's the bedroom, social dynamics, introversion versus extroversion, going out, staying in, all of these little dynamics, your particular way your tumblers are set in you, they really need to be worked out with the person. And then the standards, whether they're double standards, unfair, or perfectly reasonable, or just a trade-off that, yeah, that's not really fair, but you know what? I don't care because she does this that I really appreciate. It's my number one thing that I appreciate about her, and no one else was able to give it to me. So I'm fine with this little trade-off because it really doesn't affect me. You need to find out, as far as I can see, the standard of you developing ethics for what standards are unfair double standards, fair, reasonable double standards, and just generally your own standards and boundaries is talking. Always communicating. You talk, you will get a better sense in that honeymoon period, whether if it goes past the honeymoon period, whether anything after that pops up as a double standard, because I'm pretty sure it won't. If you've really assessed them properly as best you can, even if they come up with something new in their personality, you have a disagreement about something you've never had a discussion about in the future, because you've assessed them very accurately through your discussion and you're very, very open about all aspects of life and everything you want, the lesson to me is that if you don't talk, if you play the game, if you act overly macho like Karu mentioned, and you kind of you do everything you can, like trying to get the job, putting everything in your resume that you should, writing everything in your profile the way you should, doing the photo exactly the way it works. If you do it all that way and present a curated version of you, and you have to maintain that fake curated version of you, later on, you will be triggered by double standards. You'll be surprised by her reacting a certain way. A lot of things will be out of character. But if you can assess the person's character from every angle and every situation as much as you can, and get an honest sense of her and trust how she'll react in all these different ways, then later on, double standards, different topics, whatever, her reaction will not be out of character. That's all I have to say. So I think the standard versus double standard, again, is very it's not completely subjective. Most double standards are unfair. The very few double standards that are meant to be unfair yet correct, it helps if you're reasonable, and between a couple, it helps if you've talked about the values you both hold. Then you'll agree what's fair and unfair as a standard. That's as best as I can say. But it's a great conversation, I would say, to have with someone you go on a date with, you're getting to know. You start talking about standards, what they value in another partner, what they didn't value, what they learned that they didn't really like in the past. All these kind of things, you get more and more to understand that this there's no two ways about it. I can't get the manosphere to tick off this girlfriend. I just can't. Thanks for all the advice, but at the end, I have to kind of have my own clipboard in real time through discussion, assessing if she's got the job, and then she's got her own clipboard in her own head, assessing if we're both checking off the same things on very, very similar check boxes on our respective clipboards. And that's what you have to do, and that's only going to happen through you being yourself and talking about everything. And the moment a red flag pops up, you talk about it, you inquire, you ask her about it, and you don't just ignore it and say, well, she's really hot, or she's the best girl I've been on a date with, so I don't want to ruin it. Just because someone's better than all the crap you've gone out with doesn't make them commitment material. That's the other bitter pill to swallow. You have to make them fit your values. Just because they're not crazy doesn't mean they're good. So anyway, I think it was a good discussion. Anything else to add?
Does her clipboard fit in your frame, though?
Yeah. Well, it should. It should. I mean, yeah.
You must have one hell of a big frame then.
Well, insofar as her clipboard fits into your frame, that it's very similar, i.e. compatibility. I'm not saying that her clipboard is empty and yours is full of checkboxes and she just happily just puts her empty clipboard into yours. I'm saying that when, she can superimpose her clipboard over yours like two layers, and they kind of very much fit. Like when you look at DNA samples and they closely match DNA, you never get like an exact DNA match across when you overlay the two. It's kind of like when you overlay the DNA of both of you after conversation, they kind of very much align. They're not perfect, but they align. But most of us kind of go and they look nothing like the other person, but we don't want to put the DNA slides over each other. We do everything to resist it. So we talk about male, female nature, hypergamy, the laws and things like that. But really, you've got to do your best to put both of your DNA overlapping and seeing if you match.
But the problem is, human, if her clipboard is in your frame, then you have the ability to filter what goes on that clipboard. So you can tell her, you're not allowed to put that on your clipboard.
Well, again, why you shouldn't expect a blank clipboard to come into your frame. You should look for the two clipboards to be able to be overlapped and to match. In that sense, you should come into each other's frame to a large degree. Maybe not perfectly, but I hope people understand the analogies we're giving.
I don't care if they do. I just like pushing your buttons at the end.
All right, guys, like, subscribe, do all the interactive stuff. YouTube loves it. And thanks, Karu, for dropping in. And,
anytime.
Yeah, remember, it's daylight savings now, so we've gone ahead an hour. I don't know how that affects the rest of the world, because some parts of the world don't even have daylight savings. All right, I'm going to go enjoy the rest of my Sunday. For the rest of you, jump onto Gilded if you have a microphone. I might drop in if I get a chance, but I've got to do a few things. But anyway, nice to be here again, and I'll catch you in the next video or stream. Say bye, Karu, because I'm leaving.
Have a good one.
Bye.